All right. It is the appointed time. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us for coffee break today. We've got a special guest for you. We've got Matthew. He's one of our senior support team members. Um, he is, when I have trouble, he is one of the best people that I talk to. So you guys are going to have some great resources here today to learn from. We're going to be talking about network attached storage, what it is, who can use it, if you need it, and all of those kinds of things. Before we dive into today's topic, I do want to let you know that we have a few other events for you going on. Lori already posted some stuff into the chat. Hopefully you guys get a chance to see that. Every Tuesday and Thursday, we do a live Q&A session where you're welcome to jump in and ask questions. You can find that link in the community. And then on Fridays, we have these coffee breaks. Next week's topic, we're going to be going over calendar events, how they're different from albums, when you might want to use them, and so forth. So that's going to be a fun one to get into. It's a tool that I think a lot of people don't use very often. Also, next week on Wednesday, we're going to be having a special webinar about Secure Cloud, which is Mylio's cloud service. So if you're interested in offsite backup and storage, make sure you come to that webinar. We'll be talking about who needs it, what it's good for, and how to make the best use of that particular offering that Mylio has. We are also going to be doing a giveaway there for a year of Secure Cloud, so 2 TB of cloud storage with Mylio. So that's a really pretty nice gift there. So hopefully you guys will join us for that. All of those are listed in the calendar and the events calendar in the community. So with that, I want to go ahead and turn things over to Matthew. Welcome, Matthew. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks. Thanks for the introduction. All right. Yeah, let me get the screen share going and we'll just jump right in.
Perfect. Before you jump into presenting, just for people who have questions, probably best to go ahead and you can put them into the chat. If Lori and I can answer them as we're going through, we'll go ahead and answer you directly in the chat. Anything that we can't answer, we will save up and have a Q&A time at the end for Matthew so he can answer your specific questions.
And if I miss something, feel free to interrupt me.
All right.
All right. So NASs and Mylio. Let's dive in. So today we're going to just cover like what is a NAS if you don't know already. Some considerations if you are looking to purchase one. Some common NAS setup options with Mylio and how to connect it on a Mac or Windows computer, and how a NAS could fit into your workflow, as well as just some common pitfalls or things that sometimes people encounter while they're trying to either use a NAS or set up a NAS. So if you're here today, you either have a NAS already, or you're thinking about maybe getting one, or maybe you're trying to decide whether or not you should get a NAS or something else, like an external hard drive, or something like an external RAID, which is treated like an external hard drive, but we can talk about those a little bit later. And of course, if you want to understand how a NAS works with Mylio. All right. So a NAS is a dedicated storage device on your network. It's a mini computer, usually running some variation of Linux that has been done up by the companies that make it. So it acts as just a computer on the network that has a large amount of storage so that multiple devices can access it. Like I said, it has its own operating system. It runs by itself, and it allows you to have always available storage. Um, it's not a cloud. It's in your home or your office, but some companies do let you actually have some sort of cloud functionality if you go through their services. Um, Side note, that is not something where the performance with using the cloud function with Mylio would not be recommended. But what a NAS is not is it's not quite the same as just plugging an external hard drive into your computer. Um, it's not just automatically like a backup. Um, Kind of like if you have a Mac and you plug in an external hard drive, like Time Machine will just open and say, "Hey, do you want to add this drive?" It doesn't quite do that. The other consideration is that network speeds are not always as fast as plugging in like a USB-C or like Thunderbolt based drive. So then the NAS is great if you have multiple computers or multiple devices. Like you can even connect to a NAS if you have an iPad or iPhone. Um, so it's a way that you can kind of keep everything centralized, but also access it from all your different devices. The other benefit of a NAS is that it gives you data redundancy. So it's made up of a something called a RAID, which is a bunch of disks that are put together in order to be a bigger disk or just show as one disk. Um, of course, that makes a larger capacity in a much smaller form factor than a full like desktop computer. And these NAS devices have like backup tools, and you can do other stuff with them, such as media serving, not just keep some files on there, but and this would be great for studios or uh, at this point in today's day and age, almost every household. Um, kind of it depends on how much you want to tinker or how much data you have, or just how many people in the house need access to all that different data. So, like I mentioned, the gigabit Ethernet speeds kind of top out around 110 megabits per second, whereas if you get like a new USB 3 drive, like you'll see speeds like 480, 500 up there. Um, and of course, always available, was saying it's an always available device does assume that your network is online and that it is plugged in with an Ethernet cable and not connected via Wi-Fi. To go on that point about RAID being multiple disks together, so that you have a bigger disk and you also have something called fault tolerance. So if one of those disks fail, you can your data is still okay. You can just pull out the dead drive and replace it, and the RAID will rebuild that drive, and everything is safe. But that is not the same as a backup. Um, a backup implies that you have iterations over time. So kind of like time machine, like you go back and, oh, I want to go restore something from how it was 2 weeks ago. Um, and of course, I would recommend having a backup off-site too, in case of stuff like floods, fire, any other active nature you can think of, really. And then if you wanted to do something like remote access, that's definitely going to have certain level of complexity and security to consider. Um, you can look into something like setting up a VPN if that was something you wanted to do. Once again, if it's set up with Mylio, the performance on that will not be as great as if you were actually at home. So if you are in the market looking for a NAS, there's a bunch of different options available. How many bays the device holds. Some of them are small, just has two. You could get 4, 8. I've seen 16, but it actually goes in a rack. Depends on what you need. Because these are mini computers, they do have a CPU and RAM in it. A lot of the times, the RAM's even upgradable, and that will affect performance as well as any other tasks you may be doing on the NAS. Um, I don't want to get too crazy into it, but there are different kinds of RAIDs depending on what you want to do. Um, so like if you have that 2-bay NAS, then something like a RAID 1 where it's just the disks are a mirror of each other. One fails, you pull it out and put in a replacement, and that's it. But then there's other things like the Synology SHR and RAID 5 where it's multiple disks, 4, 5, 6 disks. And any one of them can fail, and you can replace any one of them, and it will continue on. If your home network is something other than gigabit, which is pretty much standard now, but they do offer 2.5 gigabit and 10 gigabit, that may be something to consider if you have that kind of network. I personally don't have that. I still have gigabit. And then another thing to consider, because these are mini computers, is that a lot of them can run Docker containers. Uh, which allows you to run software on the NAS. Um, for Mylio's current use case, that would be if you wanted to set up an S3 based syncing device, you could host that on the NAS and then add that to Mylio. And another thing to consider when purchasing one is noise and power consumption if it's in a living space, because they are hard drives. If you buy like mechanical hard drives, they do make the ticks and clicks. And I mean, it is a computer running, so there will be some power consumption associated with it. The most common brands or things that I see when people write in with saying they have a question about a NAS or anything like that, the big two brands that I see are Synology and QNAP. And using TrueNAS or some sort of open source NAS software or operating system to kind of build your own would probably be number three. But the company Asus Tor has also popped up many times in conversations with other users. You do have to check each model, and you can see whether or not they have the container station or container manager or Docker support. Some do, some don't. It really does depend on the CPU that they put in there, whether or not it can handle running those apps. That is a way to kind of future-proof yourself if you were to consider buying one today, is consider Docker support. It does feel like more and more things are going to that because it's just so easy to set up. It has everything. You just install the container and hit run, and it goes. There's no dependencies or anything like that. So once you have a NAS and it's set up and it's connected to your network, you will need to add it to Mylio if you want to use it with Mylio. If you're on Windows, the native SMB works great. You can go to File Explorer and make sure you're connected to it. A lot of the time, you want to make sure that you map it as a network drive, like with a letter, like sometimes like Z or Y are what I see the most. And then in Mylio, I can give you a quick demo. In Mylio, you just go to File, Add Device, select a NAS, and then navigate to the NAS itself. In this case, we do need to pick a folder to use as the NAS Mylio library location, and we'd say select this folder, and we'll want to add it as a vault right away. So the process on Windows is really straightforward, almost one or two extra steps than compared to adding a USB drive. On a Mac, however, things are not as straightforward. Currently, we recommend using NFS as the connection type instead of SMB or AFP. Sorry if I'm just throwing out abbreviations for everyone in there, but so the reason is that Apple replaced their SMB with their own version, and it just has the performance just has not been what it is on Windows. This is not Mylio specific. If you go look around the internet and just say like Apple SMB, you'll see people complaining about reliability of it. And then the other connection standard AFP has been deprecated for a while, so we don't recommend that. So I know if you have Synology and QNAPs and TrueNAS, that NFS is absolutely supported in there. It is a couple extra setup steps, but I promise it's not anything too hard or too crazy. I do have it set up here on my own NAS to just give you a quick tour of how not intimidating it is once you have it set up. So in the control panel, there's file services and NFS. Make sure it's enabled. And then any folder you want to share. When you go to edit the folder, there's an NFS permissions. And there's just a couple things like an asterisk just means anything on this network can connect. One setting that is not enabled by default on Synology that I did have to enable for me to connect is this one here, allow connections for non-privileged ports. I don't know what port number Apple uses, but it's higher than 1024. And it even tells you the name of the mount path here. So just like I showed on Windows, on Mac, I can kind of show that process a little bit too. So and you would go to the Go menu and say connect to server. And you would type in NFS colon the IP address. And then when we went to go edit, it told us, mount path slash volume1 slash photos and videos. We'll say connect, and boom, we're connected. So there's that folder that I had made earlier named Mylio NAS. And then the process is basically identical on Mac OS. Go to the file menu, add device, select an as, and then it's just connected here in Finder. And you pick the folder. So if you're trying to set one up and you have any questions, you can always reach out to support. And we'd be happy to help you go through any of those steps for getting it added. So now we can get to using a NAS with Mylio Photos. So the way that NAS devices currently work is that it relies on the computer to be the host in order to make it come online with Mylio. So whatever device you add the NAS with, ideally it should be a computer that stays at home and has an Ethernet connection, not just Wi-Fi. That will just be more stable and reliable overall. So the thing to note here is that it's only the host computer that directly communicates with the NAS. All of your other devices sync to the computer, and then the computer forwards it to the NAS. And of course, by default, the NAS is added as a vault, so all full-size originals will be sent to whatever folder. As I had mentioned before, there is an alternative called setting up an S3 bucket. I currently don't have an S3 container running on my NAS to kind of go through all of that setup. But there are some trade-offs if you wanted to think about that. One of which is that you can't add any linked folders if you have any content on the NAS that you'd like to add to Mylio. And the S3 implementation is kind of a black box, so you can't directly interact with the file system of whatever is being synced. So it just acts like a personal cloud. It's always online. You can't interact with it beyond just Mylio syncs. So, and as would make sense with Mylio if you have a large amount of storage and your computer can't hold everything. You do also, of course, want a copy of those full-size originals in your entire Mylio library to be accessible from multiple machines in your house. And if you have a desktop computer that's always on and connected. It might not make sense if your primary laptop computer is a laptop and you're not always at home. If you just have one computer and everything else is like tablets and phones, then maybe something like an external hard drive or an external SSD may make more sense. Just may be more simpler setup. And another thing is if your network is slow or unreliable, especially if you have some sort of really long like ranch houses where the Wi-Fi is on one side and you don't get great service on the other, that may be something to consider using an external hard drive instead. Another thing would be if you're only looking to just back up, a NAS might be overkill for what you're trying for that. So some of those pitfalls that I mentioned is a lot of times The concept of the computer being the hosted device that syncs with the NAS in Mylio. A lot of times we'll say, oh, like my NAS is not online. And it turns out the computer that is the host is not running Mylio at the time. To go with that, when syncing with Mylio, other devices don't sync directly to the NAS. They sync with the host computer, and the host computer forwards any syncing to the NAS. Um, Another thing would be if your NAS does have some sort of power saving settings and goes to sleep, or if the computer goes to sleep, it will drop the connection. Um, and yeah, if the network volume just kind of disconnects, then the NAS may go offline. Um, and any show file is missing that may show up will go away as soon as you reconnect. If you do have a slow or congested network, you may see slower imports or slower syncing speeds. Or if you're in the middle of a rebuild after a drive failure, the RAID will also feel very slow and you will notice a performance difference in Mylio while it's doing that. So I guess I kind of went over this as I talked about it, but to kind of avoid any of these, use Ethernet when you can. Uh, that's always just a great rule if you have the ability. And if you have the option to keep the host computer always running, a lot of the times the operating systems have a way where you can tell it turn off the display, but the computer itself doesn't have to go to sleep. Another thing that is kind of nice about using the hosted NAS is that if you do add any files directly in the file system of the NAS, or you move stuff around in the file system of the NAS, Mylio will see those changes and update itself to match. So that is one of the biggest advantages over the S3 device. And then in Mylio, there's a setting called external changes that determines what Mylio does when files are removed from the file system. So within Mylio, that setting is in the dashboard, devices, and then your NAS will be listed as a device here. And if you scroll all the way to the bottom, there's this external changes policy. And like I said, this determines what Mylio does if something gets deleted from the file system of the NAS. It will either put the file back from another Vault device. This option is actually grayed out for or not available for Vault devices because a Vault will always want to sync all full-size originals. But this third option says, hey, if I deleted something in the file system, delete it in Mylio and delete it in all the other devices that are also signed into Mylio. So that may be something you actively want to do, but it may not be something you also want Mylio to do. So most of the time I use Mylio with either of these two options, but for my vaults, it's set to restore, unless I'm specifically going in with the objective of deleting things from the file system, then I will change this setting. And then hopefully remember to change it back. And then for all the different sync types in Mylio, there's the NAS, there's an external hard drive, and something called a DAS or direct attached storage, which is like a NAS in that it has multiple hard drives, but it is plugged in with a USB or Thunderbolt cable. So external drives are a little bit different. It's only one drive at a time, only one device at a time. There's no built-in redundancy unless you go get one of those DAS RAIDs. But USB drives are plug and play, and they're also the fastest option, assuming that you don't have a 10 gigabit network at home. So if you do have a cloud service, you do have to consider an internet connections required. However, any device can sync with it anywhere they have an internet connection. But that does include things like an ongoing subscription cost, as well as the speed for syncing may vary over time, depending on many factors, either your connection, something on their end, or anything in between. So let's ask. So if you're considering a NAS, do you think it is right for you? If you have multiple computers that need to access the same files, instead of keeping a copy on every single computer, you can keep it centralized on the NAS. Um, if the amount of data you have is just more than your computer can store, a NAS may be a great option. Um, if you want on-site redundancy beyond just the backup drive, the RAID offers that. And there is some setup to go with it, so you do have to be comfortable with a little bit of tinkering and setup in order to get it going. And then, of course, if you have a computer that you can use with the NAS to keep it always online. So some other considerations. I'll start with the bottom one because I have been mentioning the DAS throughout what I've been talking about. So if a NAS doesn't feel quite right, then there is the direct attached storage where you can plug in your own drives and it acts like a USB. The most popular brands I see for that is OWC. QNAP does make their own version of a DAS as well as a NAS. And TerraMaster is kind of the third one that I see come up from other users. So even if you have a NAS, even if the NAS has the redundancy and you have a backup of your NAS, just as a Mylio best practice, we do recommend having a non-NAS vault set up. Either a computer or a USB drive is ideal. The main reason is that a USB drive can be plugged into any computer that is signed into your Mylio account to sync. It is not married to a host device like a NAS. So if something does happen or you need to go travel and you just need to grab it, um, I would definitely recommend having a USB drive, even if you have a NAS. So just to kind of go over, NAS is powerful and has its uses, but it might not be a fit for everyone or every use case. Um, Consider what you need before you have to buy it, especially when it comes to hard drive capacity and plans for redundancy. And the simpler the setup, the better. Like I said, either Ethernet is the best option. It's the most
I
stable,
asked a couple
doesn't drop out.
questions a few weeks ago about.
I'm
Sorry
sorry,
about
what
that.
was
Go ahead.
and then just to kind of reiterate again, RAID is not a full backup. It it's a redundancy of the data that's there. So I would still recommend having an offsite copy and some sort of backup process where you could go back in time if you needed to. So once you've considered all of those workflow needs, then you can start deciding on which hardware. So let's get into the questions.
All right. So we've got a handful here. Looks like we solved all right, or Al solved his own problem. He had some media that wasn't syncing and it was let's see here. He's got it connected via S3. He had to restart the MinIO container. So that's something that you might want to mention if syncing is just not happening with your NAS. That happened to me actually, what about a month or two ago? Didn't realize things had gotten disconnected and I just had to go in there and reconnect that. Um, Steve's asking roughly how much does a small NAS cost? I did a quick search while the presentation was going. It looks like the enclosures can start at around 250 and they go up from there. Depends on your needs and how much storage you need, how many bays you need. And then it's up to you how many, the size and the speed of the drives that you put into it. And then that's where the cost can really start to add up. Matthew, how much would you expect for, a good NAS for somebody who's using Mylio? Let's say they've got a library that's, you know, 4 to 8 terabytes. How
Mm,
much would you kind of expect for them to spend? About $800 to $1,000 when all is said and done?
Probably 600 to 1,000 by the time
Yeah,
everything is done with the drives. The drive capacity is going to be the biggest driver there. So,
yeah.
if you have 8 terabytes, you probably shouldn't buy an 8 terabyte drive. Well, I guess if you have 4 bays, yeah, you could put in like, you know, f- 3 6s or 4 8s or whatever there, but you want to leave room for growth. That's the key point.
Well, and with that redundancy, if you don't just take like, say 3 6s and some you have total of 18 terabytes of storage with that, if you want that redundancy, you have to consider that that information is spread over all those drives. And if you want one of those drives to be able to fail and be able to pull it out, it's going to change how much of that you can actually use.
Yes. Yeah, so if you put in, yeah, like 4 8s, you can set it up so that that's 32 terabytes.
Hmm.
But if any of those drives fail, then all of the data is potentially lost.
Right. Question here from Harold. On a Mac, what's the difference between NFS and HFS plus? My RAID is HFS plus.
Then that is a DAS. So HFS plus is a format for a like USB drive or a directly connected RAID. And NFS is a network-based connection type.
Okay. And he does specify it's a RAID. It doesn't say it's a NAS, so that makes perfect sense. Let's see what else we've got here. There's one other that came across over here. Let me find that.
Yeah, if you're using disk utility, HFS Plus sometimes shows up as like Mac OS extended journaled.
Got it. All right, so Gary says, I don't need to access a NAS remotely, and my router will allow an external hard drive to be connected to the network. It seems the latter option would be so much easier. What are your thoughts?
I would not recommend using a USB drive plugged into the router to be added as a NAS device. Um, I think you would have better outcomes if you just plug the USB drive into your computer and add it directly as a Mylio USB device.
Got it. Yeah, I was thinking what he was suggesting would be simpler, but I'm glad I asked you.
Now, if you're like setting up the NAS for the first time and you have a bunch of data you want to move over, a lot of them do have USB ports on them, and you can just plug in a USB drive, and then right from the NAS interface, you can actually like drag and drop. So then you'd get the USB sync speeds, and you wouldn't be limited to the network sync speeds.
Okay. All right. Are there any other questions? I know Matthew gave us a lot of information today. The good news is this was recorded. So if you need to go back and revisit any of this, you're absolutely going to be able to. Lori will get the recording posted here within a day or so, probably this afternoon, but if at the latest, probably Monday. Um, is there anybody else that we can help today? No, Al, you just turned your camera on, so I thought maybe you have a question.
Yeah, just that follow up on the LinkedIn video
Oh,
article.
yes.
Thank you.
All right. So he mentioned about, let me see if I can find it here in the um so Minio archiving their GitHub. Do you have anything to comment on that from Matthew?
My question is, does that change that impact Mylio at all? Is there anything I need to do on that? I don't know if you had a chance to look at that article at all that came in, but
I did not know that their GitHub was being taken down or being removed. I do know last year, probably around April or so, they made some pretty big changes to the app to kind of get away from free users. So they removed a bunch of functionality from the UI that you could still do with the command line. And that kind of put a lot of people off from ever adding or creating it, but I have not seen anything about MinIO
Yeah.
going away completely.
Yeah, according to that article that they said that Mylio archived its GitHub repository on February 12th of this year. Um, and the repo is now tagged as no longer maintained. So I didn't know if that was going to have any kind of impact.
I just sent you the
It
link they referenced in Slack, Matthew.
Okay. It doesn't directly affect Mylio. There are many other S3 services that you can add
Mhm.
instead of MinIO. Some of them
Yeah.
are like companies that are cloud-based, like Backblaze has an option for that. Um, but if you wanted to self-host something, I did have someone mention that something called Garage FS worked well for them.
Yeah, they mentioned Garage and Sweet Veed, FS, and then Ceph with S3 Gateway. They mentioned those in this article. Okay. But
If you
my main concern was whether it was going to impact Mylio, and I had to do something on my end. That's all.
No.
Yeah, that's a great question though. So for anybody who already has one set up with Docker and MinIO, do they have to make any changes?
There won't be any more updates for it for MinIO itself. Like Mylio will continue to sync with whatever container you already have set up on the NAS.
Okay.
But as time goes on, there are security things to consider, especially if you do access your NAS from outside the house where you have any of those cloud services set up,
Yeah.
and then you're
Uh,
using an S3 service.
okay, that's good to know. I currently don't, but that's my goal is to be able to access it, but I
Okay.
currently don't. But thanks for that.
Cool. Well, I don't see any other. Oh, looks like there is something else that just popped up, maybe. Ah, let's see here. Are there any brands of NAS to avoid?
I don't know. Because like the four brands or the three brands plus the open source are pretty much the only ones that I see or hear about from Mylio users. So that's Synology, QNAP, ASUS Tor, and then TrueNAS or Open. I think it used to be called OpenNAS.
Okay.
I know there were some Western Digital MyClouds or WD MyClouds. Those were, for lack of a better word, dumb NASs. Like you plugged them in and it was network storage, but it didn't have any of these other like full-fledged operating system features.
Interesting. Smith is also mentioning a company called Ugreen. Have you heard of Ugreen?
I have heard of them. I have not directly worked with any of them.
Okay. Excellent. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Matthew, for your excellent presentation. Hopefully this gave people a lot of information to work with. Oh, it looks like Gary has a question hand up. Gary, would you like to unmute and ask your question? Let's see here. Finding the list here. There you are. Ask to unmute. You're welcome to unmute, Gary, if you would like to ask a question.
I thought I had.
Oh, there you go.
I spoke to you yesterday, and you were going to get together with the problem people and problem solvers. And I received an email not too long after that that gave me a very clear step-by-step with alternatives on how to solve my temporary syncing problems and the other RAID not showing up. And I got rid of the syncing problems. It was very simple, and
Excellent.
and got the other RAID up so that it shows up in the folders. And I got rid of close to, well, over 4,000 duplicates because I had the two RAIDs and I knew there was lots of duplication because I was storing them in both places quite often. So anyway, got rid of 4,000 duplicates. One RAID, both RAIDs are have a vault, and that's working very well. I have a NAS also, and I use that basically. I just drag and drop um, everything that's on my RAIDs into the NAS in well identified folders, and so I have a it's not truly a backup like Matthew says, but I do have other copies that don't get affected by the day-to-day stuff because they're just sitting there doing nothing. But that makes you feel safer.
Yeah,
For sure.
that's definitely a viable option for using a NAS with Mylio is to not directly use it with Mylio and just use it as a backup destination.
Yep.
So like if you're on a Mac and you use Time Machine, there is a way that you can tell Time Machine to exclude an external drive from the way that it works is it's an exclusion list and it like lists all the USB drives as excluded. So if you wanted to, you could, in theory, like deselect one of the RAIDs from being excluded and then back up to the NAS. And Time Machine would back up that RAID to the NAS.
I'll look into that.
And
That's not,
that would be outside of Mylio.
yeah.
So there would be no overhead with syncing to the NAS with Mylio, and then you'd get the Time Machine iteration.
Yeah. But anyway, thank you very much, Angela, for getting that information made available for me. It was a very good relief. By later that night, I had everything done and nothing was even syncing anymore. So it worked very quickly.
I'm really glad to hear that. And then it looked like I saw Edward, you had your hand up. Looks like you put it back down. Not sure if you still have a question.
Yes, but I'm off topic.
Oh,
I'll save it for another day.
oh, all right. Sounds good. All right. There anything else NAS related that we can help you with today? If not, then we will have our live Q&As next week, Tuesday and Thursday. Wednesday, we will have a webinar on Secure Cloud and using Mylio Drive Plus. So if you're interested in learning more about that to see if that would be a good fit for your workflow, I will go into all of that and give you all of the details. We'll also have a giveaway for a full year of 2 TB of Mylio Drive Plus. So it's going to be a nice little giveaway there and a little bonus for someone who comes to that webinar. Friday next week, we're going to have coffee break. We'll be talking about calendar events, who might want to use them, when you can make the best use of them, and so forth. So that'll be a fun one. Hope you guys will join me for that. Thank you very much again to Matthew for joining us and for his excellent presentation, all of that useful information. I hope you guys enjoyed this and learned a little something. If you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out in the community and we'll do our best to help you out. And with that, I want to wish you guys a great weekend and we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.